Cool. So great to have you and to get the chance to talk about your music some. It's funny, I feel like I already know you a little bit just through playing your music, but we haven't actually had the chance to like talk about it much yet, but here we are.
Right.
I guess my first question is just like um, a little more general, just
Mm.
to get to know you as a composer and like what is like currently inspiring you as a composer,
Mm.
or you could think of that more broadly, like what inspires you in general, or what. Yeah,
Yeah,
just curious about that.
sure. Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think more and more recently, I've been sort of trying to very interested in sort of combining things, at least that sort of like sort of seemingly disparate elements. That I'm wrapping up a piece right now actually for that was commissioned by a singer in New York, and it uses everything from it like the text is from like the ancient Japanese calendar, but I'm using concepts of like Carnatic music, and the whole thing is sort of there. But then there's sort of like this sort of Renaissance polyphony kind of thing happening at the same time. So it's
Wow.
like I'm sort of so that's sort of in that case it's sort of very multicultural, I guess, in that sense. But even on a broader level, like even in wrestling, right? I'm sort of interested in this idea of like, okay, so like what if we take all these like these grooves and like all these like really disparate like time signatures and funky things, and then sort of combine these against these like very sort of floating ethereal kind of
Mm-hmm.
sections, which actually that this piece, now that I think about it, is probably the beginning of that tends to happen in a lot of my music. There's sort of these like very visceral grooves just because of the music I grew up listening to, and 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 then these like suspension of time is sort of how I like to think about it, where you're just sort of floating in these like nowhere spaces. And so I think wrestling was actually the first time that I really kind of tried to like dig into that idea.
Nice. That's cool. Yeah, wrestling. It's because of the juxtaposition of those different sections. It's not. It's just very. I was gonna ask you about that, like the structure of it. It's very. It's not quite structured like any piece I've played before.
Mm.
And there's a cello solo at the end, which I appreciate. Sort of feels like the cellist wins the piece a little bit. No,
Yeah,
no.
no, that's it. That's it. Well, my hope is that
But
it's
yeah, I was. I don't know if you wanted to talk more to just how you like structured wrestling.
sure. I mean, it's funny actually that cello solo for me was sort of I don't know if you got this sense like until that point in the piece, but my I know I'd always sort of felt like um the cello was sort of getting the short end of the stick for the first like 8 minutes. Like there's sort of it's like they never really get to like do the thing. The
Mm-hmm.
vibraphone kind of gets to do the thing, and the violin gets to do the thing, and the cello sort of to me sort of always kind of feels like nope, you got cheated. Nope, you got cheated. And so for me that was sort of this thing where I'd sort of for me that was like yeah, exactly. This sort of moment of like, I like how you said the cellist wins the piece. Exactly, like it's like this sort of like triumph of like, no, like I'm supposed to have this moment. Like you guys all got your moments. Like I was
Yeah.
just supposed to have this moment. And so, for me, it was sort of like the hope was that it would feel like sort of like a resolution of this like problem,
Hmm.
that it presented as like, hey, how come the cellist never got to like do what they
Wow.
needed to do. So that's
Cool.
great. I'm glad
Yeah,
that
it was fun. It was really fun, and I'm always happy just to sit back and groove with everything, but I appreciated the opportunity for the solo. It's cool.
yeah. And I mean, like I think I mentioned to you earlier, it's like, that writing that solo, I think was the first time. I think that was sort of the beginning of like this long love affair I've developed now with the cello, where I was like, whoa, this is a marvelous instrument. It can
Mm.
just, when it gets up on that, on that A string, and then on the flip side, it can do those, there's a couple in those couple of those floaty sections where it's just really holding down the low notes. I'm like,
Hmm.
wow, this is what's possible on this instrument. Like, this is amazing. I mean, this is crazy. So, I,
Yeah. How did so the instrumentation for the piece is also kind of interesting. I haven't played many pieces that are like vibes, cello, and violin. I suppose there are some, but I was wondering like what the yeah how the piece started in terms of like the instrumentation and the way you were thinking about
right. It's like,
piecing it together in
yeah,
that
it's like,
way.
how'd you
Yeah.
write a piece for a vibraphone, violin, and
Yeah.
cello, right? Like, that's
Right.
weird. Yeah. Um, no, I totally get it. Actually, it's really funny because it it was a 2018, fall 2018 actually was when I wrote this piece. I think I technically finished it in 2019, but um so it's at UNT, and International Contemporary Ensemble was coming to like do a residency, and they were going to do some readings and workshops, and they were coming for a big performance for some of our faculty members' works. And so as part of that, they were going to do these readings, and they said, okay, this is our instrumentation list. And I'd written a little bit for violin and cello, and I looked at sort of what else was there, and I saw that a percussionist, and I'd heard the vibraphone before, and I thought, oh, I really like that instrument. I wonder what would happen if I just put those three together, because I looked at a couple of the other ones, and a couple of the other instruments, and they were things that I just was like, I have no idea how to write for those. And I just like was like, whoa, like I don't know if I'm gonna be able to figure that out. So it's weird because like in a sense it I mean, in a way it was almost arbitrary, like the way that it started. And I didn't really know what it was gonna be for a long time. And actually even when we did the reading, it was only a minute and a half, maybe 2 minutes of music. I think it was, something resembling what the beginning of the piece is, and that it had that first sort of suspended time kind of thing. Really, just like the building blocks. Like that's all that got read.
Mm.
And then from there, I spent the next like, I don't know, 3 months, 4 months, kind of like turning it into wrestling now, the 11-minute long piece that it is. But
Nice.
so that's where the origin sort of came to it came about, from that piece. And yeah, you're right, it's like I would actually be really curious to hear the pieces that you have heard for vibraphone, violin, and cello, because I've
Yeah.
never heard
Well, I was
any.
thinking about it. It's just being in Verdant Vibes. I think is because Piero and Emmy and I also played a piece by Kirsten
Oh, cool.
Volanas that has that instrumentation.
Really?
And then the other thing I played it was marimba, not vibraphone.
Okay, cool.
So it's a little different, but
I'll have to ask her about that though. I'll be curious to hear what she thinks of wrestling, and I'll want to hear I want to hear her piece for that instrumentation too. That's
yeah.
good.
Um, and wrestling, did you want to? Was there a significance behind the title wrestling, and or how did that
Hmm.
come about?
Yeah, so I thought about sort of, I'm not sure why I was thinking about this when I was writing that piece, but I think the piece starts sort of very simply, in a way. I mean, it's just like this the materials are very simple, which I think has become, you'd ask me like sort of what inspires you as a composer and that sort of thing. And that I think is showing up again and again in different ways. It's like, oh, simplicity, simplicity,
Mm.
simplicity. Like, and in some ways, I actually think the ways that things change and evolve in wrestling is actually very pretty complicated compared to what I'm doing now. I mean, now it's like, actually but the idea was the same, that like you take these very simple materials, uh in the hopes that actually you would be able to follow them and like just very transparently sort of see what's happening, no secrets really as to like what's going on. And so in that sense, actually, I think what happens in wrestling is like kind of complicated compared to what I'm doing now.
Hmm.
But yeah, for some reason I had this idea of like how, sort of in the same vein of like how you can make something out of these very simple blocks. And so for me, it was this image of like, this very simple sound of like leaves rustling, right? And um, I think I say something in the program note, just to like paraphrase that. It's like, it's like a sound you don't really think about that much because it's like you hear it all the time. I mean, I don't know, maybe if you live in New York City, you don't hear it all the time. I don't know. But,
Hmm.
the rest of us, like, yeah, there's trees, and like you hear that sound all the time, but you can never even think about it.
Hmm.
But if you do think about it, like if you actually pay attention to it and try and like mark time or like moments in your life by like that sound because it will always be there, then it like can become something very powerful. It can become this thing where you build sort of these larger structures out of this very simple sound and this very simple kind of marker, which as I'm saying these words out loud, it's like, oh, well, yeah, isn't that what I'm trying to do even today? Like 2 years later, it's like use these very simple things to create these sort of larger structures that, you perceive, over time.